What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, World Boxing Council, better known as the WBC, President Mauricio Suleiman, board of 32 members, have confirmed that they have gave their blessings for undefeated, unified WBA, WBC, IBF, welterweight world champion superstar boxer, who is widely considered to be top two, if not number one, definitely top five pound for pound best fighters in the world, and Errol the True Spence Jr., who has a record of 28 wins, no losses, no draw, 22 big wins by way of knockout. He is 32 years of age, 5'9" with a 72-inch arm reach, to face off against former unified WBC, WBA, welterweight world champion superstar boxer Keith one-time Thurman, who is 31 loss, no draws, 22 wins by way of knockout. He is 34 years of age, 5'8" with a 69-inch arm reach. With that said, Mauricio Suleiman, he was featured on The Boxing Voice today with Nestor Gibbs, to which he stated that they have given their blessings and that Errol Spence asked them to be allowed. He petitioned them to be allowed to fight Keith Thurman at the junior middleweight 154-pound division because Keith Thurman is the mandatory. So they gave their blessings for it, and it will be a WBC sanctioned bout, okay? So indeed, Errol Spence is satisfying his mandatory against Keith one-time Thurman in this fight. They stated that they still don't know if Errol Spence plans to stay at junior middleweight or if Errol Spence plans to go back down to 147. Nonetheless, they stated that, Errol Spence Jr., is satisfying his mandatory, okay? And this is a WBC sanctioned belt as well. Errol Spence is well into his rights to be able to fight above the weight class for a mandatory and satisfy it. This is new to me because I thought that you had to fight within your respective weight class to satisfy your mandatory. But according to Mauricio Suleiman, you can move up to 154 and satisfy your mandatory, right? Now, Ness was pushing and trying to poke and see and get information, but he stated that he didn't want to. Ness said, well, what if Errol Spence loses? Does that make Keith Thurman, the WBC world champion, right? How does that play out? Because if Errol Spence indeed is satisfying his mandatory, then Keith Thurman wins, then does that make Keith Thurman the champion? So he said he don't want to speculate. He wants to see how it plays out, how it unfolds. So essentially what he's telling you is that if Errol Spence wins, he's satisfied his mandatory. But if Keith Thurman wins, he's not going to be the WBC champion. They'll have to mull it over, okay? So Errol Spence wins, he would satisfy his WBC mandatory challenger in Keith Thurman, right? Then another thing he stated that was untrue. He stated that, when the negotiations fell through for Errol Spence to face off against his biggest rival in the biggest fight in boxing between himself and undefeated three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the reigning WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the #1 best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, in Terrence Bud Crawford, who has a record of 39 wins, no losses, no draw, 30 big wins by way of knockout, 35 years of age, 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. So he stated that when those negotiations fell through is when they decided to make Keith Thurman the mandatory, right? He was petitioned and he was made the mandatory. Well, we knew in February, okay, when Keith Thurman fought and made his ring return against former junior welterweight WBA regular champion Mario Barrios in February, when Mario Barrios moved up after being stopped by Gervonta Tank Davis. Mario Barrios was stopped by Gervonta Tank Davis, who jumped up from 130 to 140 and challenged. Then Mario Barrios moved up immediately from being knocked down and knocked out by Gervonta Tank Davis. He moved up to 147. He challenged Keith Thurman, and Keith Thurman that fight was made a title eliminator for the mandatory. The winner was going to be the mandatory for Errol Spence. So they already knew and had in mind that they wanted to make this fight the mandatory challenger for Errol Spence. And then he goes on to say, we wanted to give the fans what they wanted, and we want to make the Keith Thurman-Errol Spence fight happen. As I told you guys, they were pushing Errol Spence to make this fight with Keith Thurman, okay? Errol Spence does not want to fight Keith Thurman. They have been pushing for this fight for Errol Spence to face off against Keith Thurman, point blank and period, okay? And so he's saying that, after the Terrence Crawford fight fell through, they made him the mandatory, when indeed we knew he was going to be the mandatory, because in February, after Keith Thurman beat Mario Barrios, a poll was put up by the PBC, Premier Boxing Champion, founder and advisor Al Heyman, and the team that stated who wants to see Errol Spence versus Keith Thurman. To which Errol Spence responded to the poll, and he went on there and he said the PBC need to take the L out of lover, meaning it's over. Okay. And then he stated, when I said never, I mean never. I'm never fighting Keith Thurman. So we knew that the plan was to push Keith Thurman to fight Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence, he has plans to fight Terrence Crawford, as he stated, it's strap season. He's the big fish, and he wants to be undisputed. He wants to create history, right? So now Mauricio Suleiman is stating that we have to see if Errol Spence plans to stay at junior middleweight or if he plans to move back down. We know Errol Spence, like he stated after his next fight, he plans to spin the block and come back and revisit the opportunity and possibility of fighting Terrence Crawford for undisputed. There's never been a 4-belt undisputed welterweight world champion in history of sport of boxing. The last undisputed champion was Super Zab Judah, Hall of Fame superstar, iconic boxer, and he held 3 belts. Okay, so now the WBO, World Boxing Organization, has been made, a major sanction body, and now there's 4 belts. Okay, you used to just needed the original belt that was created. The first belt was the WBA. The second belt was the WBC, then the IBF, and now the WBO. Okay, so initially you only needed, when Sugar Ray Leonard fought against Tommy the Hitman Hearns back in September 16th of 1981, it was just for the WBC and the WBA. Then the IBF made themselves a major player in the sport of boxing. They became a major sanction body. And now the WBO most recently became a major sanction body, and that's the belt that Terrence Crawford holds, okay? And so Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence makes for the massive undisputed showdown. So many people question whether Errol Spence, who stated that he's been at this weight for 10 years, is long overdue for him to exit the division. He says that it's not easy to make the weight. Is planning on moving up, to 154 at some point in time anyway. Is Errol Spence going to move up to 154 and come back down to 147 to challenge Terrence Crawford? I wouldn't advise it. I just think that 32 going on 33 years of age, letting your body get acclimated to competing at 154 pounds or more. He's going to weigh more than 154 pounds once, the fight on fight night. So I just believe that, Errol Spence, it just wouldn't bode well for Errol Spence to attempt to move back down to 147 after he stated that it's not easy to make 147 already. So to move up to 154, then come back down to 147, I just think it's a detriment to his body. We don't know. He don't know. Nobody knows how his body will respond trying to take off another 7 pounds, after competing at 154. I just think it wouldn't bowl well, and he may not be at full strength, right? So I think that it's just better for Errol Spence to just campaign at 154, and we see Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford at 154. Now you have guys like former world champion Chris Algieri, who says it just takes a lot of steam and a lot of luster out of the fight itself. We know that when Floyd Mayweather fought against Manny Pacquiao, nobody truly remembers what belt was on the line when they faced each other. So with that said, do the belts matter? Not really. But you would like for the biggest fight in boxing to be for undisputed. It's just an added cherry on top of what is already, being considered the biggest fight in boxing. So you add in the fact that it's historic. There's never been an undisputed 4-belt holder in the welterweight division. It's already the biggest fight. It just adds a lot of oomph to it, and it just makes it that much bigger, right? So it just added incentives that makes the fight, just more important, right? But it's still the biggest fight in boxing. I personally think that styles make fights. Keith Thurman has been inactive, to say the least. Okay, since unifying the belts against Danny Swift Garcia March of 2017, Keith Thurman has fought a total of 3 times. He fought twice in 2019, once in 2022. Okay, and he hasn't looked that spectacular in those fights. So I just think that styles make fights. I think that Keith Thurman, an active Keith Thurman in his absolute prime, Errol Spence would be a nightmare matchup for him. So you factor in Keith Thurman being inactive, his timing being off, and Keith Thurman has shown, that he's very vulnerable to the body, and that's Errol Spence's specialty, going to the body. That's what Errol Spence is specialized in. So I think that whether it's at 147, whether it's 154, whether it was 5 years ago or whether it's this year, I think that Errol Spence, no slight to Keith Thurman, just stops Keith Thurman because Keith Thurman's biggest weakness is absorbing his punch resistance to the body, and Errol Spence's biggest strength is going to the body. So I just think that Errol Spence stops Keith Thurman by the seventh, eighth round. But let's see how this unfolds and plays out. That's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like your shitty videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.